What up, everyone? Danny Boy from Flagship Freedom here. Just wanted to share this beautiful Saturday afternoon with you, talk some philosophy. I actually can't believe I didn't make this video yet. What is voluntarism and what is anarcho-capitalism? Kind of two sides of the same coin. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably already thinking, why do I care about politics? Why do I care about philosophy? These are like the most abstract, disconnected, useless topics in the world. How do they affect me and why should I care? Well, I can assure you, as somebody who came from that very level of skepticism, I can assure you that they are incredibly important ideas, and I myself have found them not only to contain a lot of meaning and purpose, but to also just be so internally consistent that I'm drawn to them like gravity. I've become passionate about it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's like my new thing. In fact, it's been that way for a couple of years now. So, anyways, let's cut to the chase. What is voluntarism? Well, it's really simple. It's the idea that all human interactions should be voluntary insofar as it is possible. A nice way to sum that up would be through the non-aggression principle, which states that it is immoral to use force against innocent people. That is, the only time force is justified is in defense of persons or legitimately owned property. So basically, don't hit, don't steal, right? It's not pacifism. You can use force, again, to defend yourself or other people or their legitimate property. But beyond that, force is not justified. It's immoral. Now, you can get into the weeds about what about preemptive military strikes and all? Okay, there may be gray areas, sure, whatever. But the general principle, the general concept, don't use force against people unless you're doing it defensively. Basically, don't attack, don't assault people who have done nothing wrong. And in that case, it's not really considered assault, right? It's defense. Pretty basic common sense stuff that we all apply to our daily lives. But we have this one big exception called the state. A lot of people call it government. Or a country. You get the idea. So where's the exception? What's the disconnect? Well, the disconnect is in what government says it's allowed to do versus what you're allowed to do. Government claims the ability and the legal and moral right to violate the non-aggression principle, to use force against innocent people, and have it just be fine and dandy. So, for example, taxation. Taxation is not a voluntary payment. It is mandatory. Now, people do vote on it sometimes, but that doesn't change the fact that it's mandatory. Like, if you don't want to buy a car or a house or food or anything in the free market, you don't have to buy it. No person is forcing you to buy something. Paying for government, on the other hand, is mandatory. You will go to jail if you don't pay for it. Likewise, another facet of government that is not voluntary, that is a violation of the non-aggression principle, is, let's say, any law that doesn't have a real victim. So a good way to know whether a law is just and moral is the phrase, no victim, no crime, right? So, for example, drug prohibition laws or alcohol prohibition in the 30s in the United States basically tell you what you can and cannot put in your body, even though you own your body. Now, I'm not saying it's good to do drugs or to drink excessively. However, as the person who owns your body and your life, well, only you get to decide what to do with those items. Similarly, you have to participate in all sorts of things that you never agreed to. For example, let's see, Social Security, you're forced to pay into something against your will. You may or may not want to participate, paying for public school, funding the military, the police, all sorts of things. Now, I can already hear all the counter arguments coming in, but we need those things, but we benefit from those things, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, sure, those are all vital goods and services. However, why can't they be funded without theft and coercion, right? That's the whole idea of voluntarism, is that we can have all these important goods and services without threatening people with kidnapping and murder, which is what will happen to you if you avoid taxes, what I like to call theft evasion, right? So I hope you get the idea by now that the idea is that you can't force people to do or to pay for things against their will. Now, I mentioned a thing called anarcho-capitalism. It's sort of what I would call the resultant of voluntarism, if you believe in property rights and capitalism. So anarchy referring to the idea that we should live in a society without a government, without a state, that is, without an entity which claims the legal and moral right to initiate force against innocent people. So now you could have all the services, again, that the government provides, just don't steal to pay for them. Now, why do we say anarcho-capitalism? Well, I'm getting a little windy here. Maybe my hammock's going to fall from the tree. Capitalism is, well, it's the private ownership of means of production. Although I don't really like that definition. What I consider capitalism to be is just private property and trade, right? Like, you can own a house, you can own a car, you can own a factory, you can own equipment, you can employ people through voluntary negotiation to provide services. You basically work together through voluntary trade. That's all free market capitalism is, right? So when we say anarcho-capitalism, we're basically describing what would happen in the absence of the state. How would we have all of these important goods and services without the government? Well, we would have them through capitalism. I mean, capitalism already provides for every other thing in our lives, every other good and service. So why not the ones that the government currently controls? Now, a lot of people have all these pre-programmed knee-jerk responses like, well, you know, roads and infrastructure and military, those are too important to be left to the market. That's a market failure. We need the government to take care of those things. Of course, that's all nonsense, and we can get into that, but basically I'll leave you with this question. In what universe is a violently imposed monopoly ever going to give you a better result than free and open competition that you get through capitalism? Again, I'm going to say that one more time. Why would you believe that a violently imposed monopoly could ever be superior in performance to free and open competition in a competitive marketplace that you get through capitalism and free trade? Now, I'm sure there's a lot of questions swirling in your head, like, well, what about the poor? What about infrastructure? What about defense? What about all these things that the government currently does? You want chaos? You want anarchy? Well, I do want anarchy, but I don't want chaos. You can thank the anarcho-communists for giving anarchy a bad name. That's a story for another time. But I just wanted to explain to you just the bare bones ideas of voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism. The radical, crazy, wacky ideas that we shouldn't steal from people and kidnap them for refusing to pay for or participate in schemes against their will. Why? Because, well, anytime you need to use force against an innocent person, you know that you're making them worse off. So we need to stop kidding ourselves and thinking that an institution which uses force against innocent people could ever provide a net benefit to society. You know you're making somebody worse off by nature of the fact that you're using force against them and they don't want to participate in your schemes. So hopefully I've sort of whet your appetite if you're into the concepts of liberty and freedom. It's certainly a very interesting rabbit hole to dive down, and I encourage you to consider all of the implications. Again, like, how do we pay for all of those important things? How do we have those services? What about property rights and trade? And I hear that capitalism is exploitation and all this stuff. Well, those are all very worthwhile questions that we can go into, and I do hope you'll join us. So thank you so very much for the few minutes to dive into and consider a new, liberating, and incredibly important philosophy. Have a great one, and we'll see you next time.